What's the price of a mother's unconditional love when her own son puts it up for sale? I gave my son Jason everything. Not just money, my future, my health, my sleep, my dignity. I sold a rental property. I cashed out my 401k early and swallowed the tax penalty without flinching. I moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment, ate rice and beans for dinner, and worked double nursing shifts until my feet were swollen and my body ached. Also, Jason could focus on becoming a doctor without worrying about money. Every single month, I sent him $5,000. Tuition, rent, groceries, books, everything covered. He called me his hero. He sent me photos and scrubs. He told me stories about his professors, his rotations, his late-night study sessions. I was so proud I could barely breathe. 3 years. $180,000. And every single word of it was a lie. I found out the way you find out about most devastating things. Completely by accident, in the middle of something ordinary. I ran into his roommate's mother at a grocery store. She smiled warmly and mentioned how nice it was that Jason and her son had built their entertainment company together. I smiled back. I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. Jason lived alone to focus on studying. He didn't have a roommate. There was no entertainment company. She looked at me with confusion slowly spreading across her face. And in that moment, I felt the ground shift beneath me. I called the medical school that same afternoon. A registrar confirmed what I already somehow knew. Jason had withdrawn in the first semester. He had failed his anatomy exam and quietly walked away from medicine without ever saying a word to me. 3 years ago, they had sent multiple letters to his permanent address. My address. He had been intercepting my mail. That night, I drove to his apartment. Not the modest studio I thought I was paying for. A luxury penthouse I had never seen, filled with professional DJ equipment, a recording booth, 3 roommates, and the sound of music mixing through the walls. Jason was in the living room, headphones around his neck, working the turntables like a man without a single care in the world. When he saw me standing in the doorway, he didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed that I had shown up unannounced. I asked him about medical school. He shrugged, said it wasn't for him, too much memorization, too many rules. He had found his passion in music. He was an artist now, building his brand, making connections. When I asked about the $180,000, he told me to think of it as an investment in his future. His business was taking off. He had made $30,000 last year, only $150,000 less than everything I had given him. When the tears came, he told me to stop being manipulative. Said plenty of parents support their children's dreams. His roommates nodded along like I was overreacting. I left without another word. I needed time to process what he had actually taken from me. Not just the money, but the years. The double shifts. The retirement I would never get back. The property I could never unsell. The future I had slowly dismantled piece by piece, believing I was building something better. Jason didn't call to apologize. He didn't text to check on me. He stayed silent for 2 weeks. Then he called, practically buzzing with excitement. Big news. A famous DJ wanted to collaborate. A tour, a studio, an empire in the making. He just needed $50,000. Since I had already invested so much in his education, what was a little more for his real career? He would pay me back double when he made it big. He promised, just like he promised to become a doctor. He showed up to my apartment in a leased Tesla. For his image, he explained. He brought contracts and spreadsheets and an entire polished pitch. He talked for an hour about his vision, his talent, his destiny, and how everything I suffered through was the universe rewarding my faith in him. He sat across from me, glowing with confidence, expecting another check. Instead, I handed him an envelope. Inside were 3 documents: a cease and contact letter on official law firm letterhead, a spreadsheet listing every single payment I had made over 3 years with dates and exact amounts, and a small claims court filing. I watched his face change as he pulled them out one by one. The confident smile faded. His hands began to tremble slightly by the time he reached the court filing. His mouth opened and nothing came out. Then came the tears, the shaking shoulders, the cracking voice. He said he thought I believed in him, that I was supposed to support his dreams, that parents are supposed to love unconditionally. His performance was flawless. The same hitching breath, the same wounded expression he had used when he first showed me his fake acceptance letter. Back then, I had pulled him into my arms and told him how proud I was. This time, I sat perfectly still and let him finish his act. When tears didn't work, fury took their place. He stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. He said if I went through with this, I would never see him again. He would cut me out completely. No calls, no visits, no relationship. I would lose my only son over money. I stood up too. I told him I had already lost my son, 3 years ago, the moment he chose to steal from me instead of telling me the truth. I picked up my purse and walked to the door while his voice got louder behind me. 3 of his roommates emerged from their rooms looking stunned and uncomfortable. The youngest one, a dark-haired kid, quietly said they had no idea. Jason told them the money came from a trust fund. He said he was sorry. I believed him. I left without looking back. Got into my car with Jason still shouting from the doorway. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. But underneath the shaking was something I hadn't felt in years. Solid, unshakable ground. In the weeks that followed, I learned the full scope of what Jason had built with my sacrifice. His roommate Joshua, sick with guilt, came forward with meticulously organized financial records. $120,000 on professional DJ equipment, $40,000 on a luxury apartment and a Tesla lease, and the remaining $20,000 on trips to Miami, Vegas, Austin, and Los Angeles, all called business investments, all really just parties with business cards handed out between drinks. Their entertainment company had earned $30,000 total across 3 years. The famous DJ collaboration Jason pitched to me for $50,000 was a handful of emails exchanged with someone who had a modest regional following. My attorney, Samuel, called the records a game changer. Combined with the intercepted mail and the fabricated photos of scrubs and rotations, we now had airtight proof of deliberate, sustained fraud. Not confusion, not poor judgment, 3 years of calculated, intentional deception. My financial advisor, Alana, spread every document across her desk and ran the numbers with a neutral expression and a jaw that visibly tightened. The damage wasn't just $180,000. When she factored in lost investment growth, the rental property's appreciated value, the 401k penalties, the compound interest, the reduced Social Security benefits from years of overworked, low-earning sacrifice, the total reached $460,000. She slid the summary sheet across the desk without softening it. I would need to work 10 more years than planned, maybe longer, depending on my health. The cushion I had spent 2 decades building was gone. I sat in that office and cried for the first time since discovering the truth. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet, unstoppable tears. Because sitting there looking at the numbers made it undeniably real. Jason had not just stolen money. He had stolen years of my life. The retirement I had earned. The future I had bled for. Alana handed me tissues without saying a word. Then she told me about the resources available. Support groups, financial counseling, legal aid organizations for people rebuilding after exactly this kind of family betrayal. From the way she spoke, I understood that other parents had sat in this same chair, cried these same tears. That should have made me feel less alone. Instead, it just made me wonder how many of us there were. How many parents had their own children done this too? I joined a support group, Charlotte. My therapist recommended 7 other parents sitting in a circle at a community center, each carrying a version of the same wound. A woman who lost her house when her daughter opened credit cards in her name. Another who had spent her late husband's life insurance on her son's fabricated business schemes. A father who maxed every credit card he had because his son invented a cancer diagnosis to get money. Listening to them, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not just solidarity, but clarity. I had not failed as a mother. I had loved my child the way any devoted parent would. Jason was the one who chose to weaponize that love. The mediation took place in a downtown conference room with city views and fluorescent lights that gave me a headache within the first hour. Jason came in last, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt instead of his usual expensive streetwear. His hair was neat. His face looked tired. He sat across from me and stared at the table. When I walked in and took my seat, he glanced up briefly, then looked away. Without his confident performance, he seemed smaller somehow. More like a person than a character he had been playing. The mediator asked Jason to explain his perspective first. His lawyer had coached him carefully. He gave a rehearsed speech about being young, overwhelmed, afraid to disappoint me. He called it poor judgment. He never once used words like fraud or theft. He framed 3 years of deliberate lies as a series of confused choices made by a frightened kid. I watched him perform the apology and felt nothing but exhausted recognition. When it was my turn, I unfolded the statement I had written with Charlotte and read it aloud with shaking hands and a steady voice. I read about swollen feet after double shifts, about eating rice and beans, about cashing out my retirement and taking the penalty without hesitating because I believed I was investing in my son's future, about the rental property I sold, about the 3 years of lies and intercepted mail and fake photos, about discovering the luxury penthouse while I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment sacrificing everything, about having to work 10 more years because my son chose to steal from me. When I finished, the room was completely silent. The mediator looked at Jason and asked if he understood the harm he caused. His lawyer started to speak. She raised her hand and stopped him. She waited. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Finally, Jason spoke quietly. He said he knew what he was doing was wrong the entire time. He told himself that once he made it big, he could repay me and everything would be forgiven. He kept going because he was afraid to admit he had failed. I leaned forward and told him he clearly was not afraid enough to stop stealing from me for 3 consecutive years. Not afraid enough to stop intercepting my mail. not afraid enough to keep watching me work myself into the ground while he threw parties. 6 hours later, we reached an agreement. Jason would pay $40,000 over 8 years. He would sell his DJ equipment immediately for a $15,000 upfront payment. Most importantly, he would sign a document acknowledging that he had obtained money from me through deliberate fraud and deception. If he missed 3 consecutive payments, criminal charges would follow. I would only recover a fraction of what he took. But for the first time since that grocery store parking lot destroyed my world, I felt something real and solid in my hands. Accountability, legally documented, impossible to erase. Samuel and I walked out into afternoon sunlight. I stood still for a moment and just breathed. The $15,000 from the equipment sale appeared in my account 2 weeks later. I transferred it immediately into a retirement account Jason knew nothing about and would never touch. The first monthly payment arrived exactly on schedule. I stared at the transaction on my phone. $417 with a reference number, feeling something I could not quite name. Relief and grief mixed together. Relief that he was keeping his word. Grief that this was what we had become. 8 months in, my nursing supervisor offered me a charge nurse position with a salary increase. I accepted immediately. She mentioned I seemed more focused lately, more present. I realized I had reclaimed the mental energy I had spent for years on constant worry about Jason, checking my phone obsessively, lying awake replaying conversations, bracing for the next crisis. That energy belonged to me now. I was actually living my own life again. 3 years after the mediation, I signed closing papers on a small condo. My first tenants, a young couple, signed a lease for $200 above my mortgage payment. Martina took me to dinner that night to celebrate. We ordered wine and talked about how far I had come. I felt proud in a way I had not felt since before Jason's lies. Not the pride of a devoted mother funding someone else's dream, but the pride of a woman who rebuilt something from rubble with her own 2 hands. 5 years after sitting in that mediation room, Alana showed me numbers that made me smile for the first time in a financial meeting. 2 rental properties. A retirement account rebuilt to 60% of what Jason had taken. 0 debt. She said I could retire at 69. Not what I originally planned, but comfortable. Earned. I think about Jason sometimes, in quiet moments at home or walking through a grocery store. I wonder if he genuinely changed or just learned to hide himself more carefully. I wonder if he ever thinks about what he actually cost me beyond the money, but mostly I think about myself. About the woman who sat in Alana's office crying over a spreadsheet and somehow found her way back. About the night I handed my son an envelope instead of a check and watched his certainty finally crack. About every double shift that now feeds my own future instead of someone else's lie. He took $180,000 in 3 years of my life. I took back everything else. My boundaries, my dignity, my future, my belief in my own strength. He expected to break me. Instead, he taught me exactly what I was made of. And that, unlike everything I sent him, is something nobody will ever take away from me again.